The desperate rescue. The galaxy had long been at war. For years, humanity had fought against the alien empire that ruled over countless worlds. The soldiers of Earth had proven their courage and strength time and again, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to come. Sergeant Nathan Carter stood at the edge of a ravaged battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. The battle had been fierce, but there was no time to rest. The alien fleet had been driven back, but there was still a pressing mission to complete. Somewhere on this planet, a human woman was being held captive. A woman whose life was about to become the key to ending the war. Nathan knew the risks. No one else would dare go on a mission like this. The enemy, a ruthless alien queen, had captured the woman for one simple reason: to use her as a bargaining chip in the ongoing war. But Nathan had no intention of letting that happen. He had volunteered for this mission, knowing that it could mean his life. He couldn't let an innocent woman suffer for something that wasn't her fault. As Nathan approached the alien stronghold, his heart raced. The Queen's fortress was towering and dark, a stark contrast to the vibrant, peaceful world he had once known. He knew the legends of the Queen, how she ruled with an iron fist, crushing anyone who stood against her. But legends didn't matter right now. What mattered was saving the woman. He couldn't turn back. With each step, the silence of the night seemed to grow heavier. The distant sounds of alien ships buzzing overhead only added to the tension. Nathan could hear his own heartbeat, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. The Queen would not hesitate to kill if she knew he was coming. But he had to try. He had to save her. The entrance to the stronghold was heavily guarded. Alien soldiers patrolled the area, their eyes scanning the darkness. Nathan crouched behind a stack of debris, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His mind raced through the plan he had memorized 100 times. Timing was everything. He had one shot at this. If he failed, there would be no second chance. The minutes felt like hours as he watched the guards move back and forth, oblivious to the danger lurking just a few feet away. Nathan's grip tightened on his weapon. He was ready. In a sudden burst of motion, Nathan darted from his hiding spot, charging toward the nearest guard. The alien soldier didn't even have time to react before Nathan was on him, knocking him out cold with a well-placed blow. Without pausing, he quickly dragged the unconscious guard into the shadows. One down, but there were still more to go. As he made his way deeper into the fortress, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in. His footsteps echoed eerily in the silence. He had to move quickly. The woman was being held in a high-security cell, and every second he spent here put both of their lives in greater danger. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. Finally, he reached the heart of the fortress. There it was, an enormous reinforced door that separated him from the woman. Through the small glass window, he could see her, tied to a chair, her eyes wide with fear. She was alive, but barely. The Queen had done nothing to keep her alive except to use her for leverage. Nathan's heart tightened at the sight. He couldn't let her suffer any longer. But just as he was about to move forward, a voice broke the silence. "Well, well, a brave human soldier, sneaking around in my fortress," the voice said, smooth and cold. "Did you think you could outsmart me?" Nathan froze. He knew that voice. It was the Queen herself. She was standing behind him, her presence radiating danger. Without turning, Nathan tensed, preparing for the fight of his life. The Queen was no ordinary alien. Her power and cunning were legendary. And if he wasn't careful, this mission would be his last. The Queen's laughter echoed through the hall. "You've come a long way, human," she continued. "But it's too late. You won't save her. You won't save anyone." Nathan took a deep breath, his fingers flexing around the handle of his weapon. "I'll take my chances." In a flash, he spun around, raising his weapon to face the Queen. But to his surprise, she wasn't alone. Several alien soldiers had quietly surrounded him, their weapons trained on his chest. Nathan cursed under his breath. He had underestimated her. The Queen had been watching him the entire time. He had made a mistake. His plan had failed. But Nathan wasn't ready to give up just yet. He wasn't about to let her win. As the alien soldiers moved in, he knew he had to act fast. He couldn't fight them all, not with his back against the wall. But he had one option left, one final, desperate gamble. With a swift move, he dropped to the ground, rolling to the side, and firing his weapon. The shot struck one of the soldiers, sending him crashing to the floor. But it wasn't enough. The Queen's soldiers were too many, and they were closing in fast. "Time's up, human," the Queen said, her voice dripping with venom. She stepped forward, raising her hand to issue the final order. But just then, something unexpected happened. The woman, who had been silent the whole time, spoke up. "You're wrong," she said, her voice strong despite her fear. "You're not going to win. Not today." Nathan turned in shock. The woman wasn't as helpless as he thought. She had something to fight for. And maybe, just maybe, they both stood a chance. As the Queen paused, confused by the woman's words, Nathan saw an opening. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, knocking the Queen's soldiers aside and grabbing the woman's arm. Together, they ran for the exit, with the Queen's furious voice echoing behind them. This was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start. The escape was chaotic. The Queen's fortress had been designed to be a prison, and it felt more like one with every passing moment. The narrow hallways twisted and turned, making it impossible to know which way to go. Nathan and the woman ran, their footsteps echoing through the vast stone corridors as they fought against time and the Queen's soldiers. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled the woman forward. She was strong, but the weight of her captivity had taken a toll on her. Every step seemed like a struggle, but she didn't stop, didn't falter. The fire in her eyes told Nathan everything he needed to know. She was more than just a captive. She was a fighter, a survivor. Behind them, the sound of alien soldiers chasing them grew louder. Nathan knew they had little time before the Queen's forces would catch up to them. He had to think fast. His weapon wasn't enough to hold them off for long. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. "Do you know a way out of here?" Nathan asked, glancing over his shoulder as they turned a corner. The woman, her breath shallow from the exertion, nodded. "There's a hidden exit, but it's far. We need to go through the lower levels to get to it. It's the only way." Nathan nodded. The lower levels would be dangerous, but it was their best chance. He didn't have time to question it. They had no other choice. As they pushed forward, Nathan kept his eyes open for anything that could help them. The walls of the fortress seemed to close in around them, as if the structure itself was trying to trap them. Every sound seemed to be amplified. Each footstep, each breath, each moment of silence filled with dread. Nathan could hear the soldiers getting closer. He could hear the Queen's voice calling out orders, her cold laughter filling the air. But Nathan wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had one mission, and he wasn't going to fail. Not this time. They reached a large metal door, and the woman quickly moved toward a control panel beside it. She typed in a series of codes, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Come on," she muttered under her breath, the tension in her voice rising. Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder, faster. The Queen's soldiers were getting closer. Nathan could feel his muscles tense, ready for whatever came next. The door slid open with a loud hiss, and the woman motioned for him to go through. "We have to go now," she shouted. Nathan didn't hesitate. He stepped through the door, pulling her with him. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, the shadows stretching across the floor like dark fingers reaching for them. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and the Queen wouldn't stop until she had them both. As they ran down the narrow passage, the sound of their pursuers seemed to fade away for a moment. But Nathan knew it was only temporary. The Queen's wrath was unstoppable. She would stop at nothing to get them back. They rounded another corner, and suddenly, the path ahead was blocked. A group of alien soldiers stood in their way, weapons drawn and ready. The soldiers were larger and stronger than anything Nathan had faced before, their eyes glowing with a menacing light. They were ready for a fight, and they were more than prepared to take down anything that stood in their way. "Get ready," Nathan said, his voice low and steady. He knew they didn't have much time. The soldiers would be on them in seconds. But then, to his surprise, the woman stepped forward. "Let me handle this," she said, her voice cold but determined. Nathan hesitated, but then he saw the look in her eyes. She wasn't asking for permission. She was taking control. She was a fighter, and she had more power than he had realized. With a swift motion, she raised her hand, and to Nathan's astonishment, a surge of energy radiated from her body. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. Pure, raw power, crackling with intensity. The soldiers, who had been ready to attack, faltered for just a moment. In that split second, Nathan knew what they had to do. He lunged forward, taking advantage of the momentary distraction. He swung his weapon, knocking one of the soldiers to the ground, while the woman took on another. Together, they moved as one, fighting with precision and speed. Nathan couldn't believe how effortlessly she moved, how the power within her seemed to flow like a natural force. She wasn't just a victim. She was a warrior in her own right. In a few short moments, the soldiers were defeated, lying unconscious on the cold floor, but their victory was short-lived. The sounds of more footsteps reached Nathan's ears. The Queen's forces were closing in again, and this time they wouldn't be so easy to defeat. "We have to keep moving," the woman said, her voice urgent. She was already turning toward the next corridor. Nathan nodded, but something in his gut told him that the worst was yet to come. They had escaped the Queen's soldiers once, but the real danger still lay ahead. The Queen herself was coming for them, and nothing would stop her from taking them both back to her fortress. As they continued down the darkened hallways, the tension grew. Nathan knew that this was only the beginning of something far bigger. The Queen had underestimated them both, and now they were about to show her just how wrong she had been. The Queen's wrath was about to be unleashed, and Nathan wasn't sure if they would survive the storm. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let her win. Not now, not ever. Nathan and the woman pushed forward through the winding corridors of the alien fortress. Their escape was not just a matter of survival anymore. It had become something much bigger. With every step they took, they felt the weight of the Queen's anger closing in on them. The sounds of alien soldiers were ever present, but it wasn't the soldiers Nathan feared. It was the Queen herself. Her wrath was a force that could shatter everything in its path, and she wasn't going to let them get away so easily. They reached a large chamber, dimly lit and cold, with walls made of smooth, polished black stone. The air was thick with tension. As they entered, the door behind them slammed shut with an ominous clang, trapping them inside. The woman stopped and turned to Nathan, her face grim. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't outrun her anymore. She's going to make her move now." Nathan looked around. The room was massive, with high ceilings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. It was a perfect arena for a showdown, a place where the Queen would make her final stand. Before Nathan could respond, a low, menacing voice echoed through the chamber, freezing both of them in place. "You think you can escape me?" The voice was chilling, filled with cold fury. It was the Queen. She appeared in the doorway on the opposite side of the room. Tall and imposing, her figure cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around her. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her expression was one of pure rage. She was not alone. Several of her most loyal warriors stood behind her, weapons drawn and ready. Nathan felt the weight of her gaze settle on him. The Queen was looking directly at him, her eyes narrowing as she took in his presence. She could sense the defiance in him, the unwillingness to surrender. He had saved the woman, and now he was about to face the consequences of his actions. The Queen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You are brave, human," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "But bravery won't save you from me." Nathan's mind raced. He knew he couldn't defeat the queen directly. She was far too powerful. But he had something she didn't. He had something they both needed to survive. The woman beside him stepped forward, her expression fierce. "I won't let you hurt him," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she must have felt. "You're the one who's underestimating us." The queen's laughter echoed through the chamber. "Underestimate you? I have watched your kind. I know exactly what you are capable of, and yet you think you can stand against me." With a flick of her hand, the queen summoned a surge of energy. A wave of dark power rushed toward them, forcing Nathan and the woman to step back. The force of it was overwhelming, and Nathan could feel the air crackling with the queen's strength. But instead of retreating, the woman stepped forward again. Her own energy flared, and with a sharp movement, she sent a counterattack that collided with the queen's dark power, creating a blinding flash of light. The room trembled from the force of the collision. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He had never seen anything like this before. The woman's power was incredible, like nothing he had ever experienced. She was more than a survivor. She was a force in her own right. But even with her power, the queen wasn't backing down. Her eyes glowed brighter, and her voice rang out, filled with fury. "You think you can challenge me? You think you can defeat me?" Nathan didn't wait for her to finish. He knew this wasn't a battle they could win by strength alone. He needed a plan, and fast. He turned to the woman. "We need to distract her. Keep her focused on you." The woman nodded, understanding instantly. She didn't hesitate for a moment. She threw herself at the queen again, sending another powerful wave of energy toward her. The queen laughed, raising a hand to block the attack. "You are foolish to think you can win," she sneered. But even as she spoke, she seemed to grow more focused on the woman's power. It was clear that the queen believed the woman was the greater threat. But Nathan knew the truth. The woman wasn't the one the queen should fear. It was him. With a sudden burst of energy, Nathan lunged for the queen. His movements were fast, calculated. He had seen the way she focused on the woman's attacks. Now he had to strike while she was distracted. In that split second, Nathan reached the queen, using every ounce of strength and speed he had. He knew this was a risk, but he didn't have a choice. The queen's eyes widened in shock as Nathan reached her. Her body tensed, but it was too late. Before she could react, he grabbed a small hidden device from his belt, an old technology, one he had scavenged from an earlier escape, and activated it. A flash of light filled the room. The queen screamed, a sound of pure rage and shock. For a moment, she was disoriented, and Nathan took the opportunity to shove her back. The room fell silent as the queen stumbled, her strength momentarily disrupted. Nathan could feel the tension in the air. The queen was in rage, but she was also shaken. The moment of vulnerability was their chance to escape. "Now," Nathan shouted to the woman. Without a second thought, the woman sprang into action, unleashing one final blast of energy. The queen cried out in pain as the wave of power struck her, sending her crashing to the ground. But Nathan knew this wasn't over. The queen would return. She wouldn't give up so easily. This was only a temporary victory. The woman turned to Nathan, her expression tense but determined. "We need to move. Now." Nathan nodded. He didn't need to be told twice. They had beaten the queen for now, but they had no time to waste. There were still more dangers ahead, and they couldn't afford to stay in the queen's lair any longer. They turned and ran, knowing that the queen's wrath would follow them wherever they went. But for the first time, they had the upper hand, and they weren't going to let it slip away. Nathan and the woman sprinted through the fortress's dark corridors, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, a constant reminder that time was running out. Behind them, the queen's enraged shouts reverberated, growing louder with each passing second. The queen had been momentarily weakened, but Nathan knew it wouldn't last. She was far too powerful and vengeful to stay down for long. As they rounded another corner, They came to a massive, sealed door. It was their only option for escape, but the door was enormous, reinforced by alien technology that Nathan had no clue how to unlock. The woman skidded to a halt, her breathing labored but steady. She didn't hesitate, though. Her fingers danced across a hidden panel on the side of the door, and the sound of a faint hum filled the air as she worked. "Can you get it open?" Nathan asked, glancing over his shoulder. He could hear the Queen's footsteps. No, the Queen's army, closing in, and they didn't have much time. "I'm trying, but these locks are complicated," the woman replied, her voice tight with effort. Her hands flew over the controls, her focus intense. Nathan could feel the pressure mounting as the sounds of pursuit drew nearer. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, but they couldn't afford to be caught in a dead end. The Queen was ruthless, and every minute they spent in the fortress put them closer to certain doom. The door suddenly flickered to life, a soft blue light surrounding its edges. The woman's fingers froze, eyes widening. "Got it," she shouted, her voice full of relief. Before Nathan could react, the door slid open with a low, grinding sound. They had mere seconds to get through before the Queen's forces reached them. "Go, go, go," Nathan urged, motioning for the woman to lead the way. They dashed through the open doorway, but as they crossed the threshold, a loud explosion shook the entire corridor. The door slammed shut behind them, blocking the Queen's soldiers from pursuing, at least for now. The sound of their screams echoed through the walls, a testament to the Queen's fury. The room they had entered was eerily quiet, illuminated only by the faint glow of strange alien crystals embedded in the walls. Nathan's eyes scanned the space, assessing their surroundings. It was a large, circular chamber, and from the looks of it, they were now deep within the heart of the fortress. Escape was only the first step. They still had to find a way off the planet, away from the Queen's wrath. Nathan turned to the woman, his voice low and urgent. "Do you have any idea where we are?" The woman shook her head, her expression tense. "No, but I know the ship's control center is near. We need to move fast." Before Nathan could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something much worse. The entire fortress was shaking. Something was coming, something much bigger than they could handle. They both looked up as a deep, guttural growl vibrated the air. The sound made Nathan's blood run cold. Suddenly, a monstrous figure appeared at the far end of the room. It was one of the Queen's elite warriors, larger than any human, armored in jagged alien plating. Its face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. The creature's eyes locked onto Nathan and the woman, and it growled, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The woman's hand instinctively went to her weapon, but Nathan held her back, his eyes scanning the room for another way out. The warrior was blocking their path, but there had to be another exit. "Stay calm," Nathan whispered. "We can get past this." But even as he spoke, the warrior's massive form moved toward them with terrifying speed. It was too fast, too strong to fight head-on. Nathan's mind raced. There had to be another way out, another way to outsmart this creature. The woman drew her weapon, a sleek, futuristic rifle, but Nathan caught her wrist before she could fire. "No," he said firmly. "We can't afford to make noise. Let me handle this." He looked around the room one last time, then spotted something at the far side. An old ventilation shaft. It was high up, but the walls were smooth. If they could just get to it. He motioned to the woman, his voice steady. "Up there. We can escape through the vents." The woman hesitated for a split second, then nodded. They both sprinted toward the shaft, with the warrior hot on their heels. Nathan reached the bottom of the wall first, jumping and grabbing onto a metal grate. He pulled himself up with all the strength he could muster, hauling himself into the shaft. The woman followed, her movements fluid despite the pressure of the situation. They both climbed quickly, their hearts racing, the sound of the warrior's footsteps pounding on the floor below them. But they couldn't stop now. The Queen's wrath had already claimed too many lives, and they couldn't afford to let it claim theirs. Nathan's mind raced as they crawled through the dark, tight corridors of the ventilation system. They had to find the control room, and fast. If they didn't, they'd be trapped here forever. Then came the voice, a cold, menacing voice that sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. "You can run," the Queen's voice echoed through the vents, "but you can never escape." Her voice was everywhere now, seeping into the walls, the air, their very souls. Nathan's blood ran cold as the weight of her words sank in. She had already won. She just didn't know it yet. But Nathan wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not while there was still a chance. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nathan and the woman crawled through the dark, narrow ventilation shafts, their bodies pressed close together. The air was thick, stale, and cold, making it hard to breathe. But they couldn't stop now. They were running out of time. The Queen's voice echoed in their minds, taunting them, and Nathan could feel the tension mounting with every passing second. As they reached the end of the shaft, they found a small vent opening just above a darkened corridor. Nathan slowly pulled himself up and peered through the grate. His heart skipped a beat as he saw what lay before them. A massive room filled with alien technology and soldiers. The Queen's forces had already anticipated their escape route. "This is a trap," Nathan muttered under his breath, his mind racing. "We can't go out there." The woman, who had caught up to him, looked at the room and nodded. Her expression was grim. "We'll have to find another way out. But first, we need to disable their systems. If we don't, they'll track us down in minutes." Nathan looked down at the control panels below, which appeared to be connected to the fortress's main security systems. If they could take out the systems, they might be able to buy themselves some time to escape. But doing that would be dangerous. It would set off alarms, and there was no telling how much longer the Queen would let them live. "How do we do this?" Nathan whispered, his eyes scanning the room for anything that could help. The woman studied the room for a moment, her brow furrowing in thought. "There's a control panel on the far wall. If we can reach it and hack into their system, we can disable their security measures." "That's our best shot," Nathan said, trying to suppress the rising panic. He was about to ask her how she planned to hack into the system when a low, deep growl echoed through the room, sending a chill down his spine. They froze, hearts pounding. The noise came from the far side of the room, where the Queen's elite warriors were patrolling. Nathan's grip tightened on the woman's arm. "We have to move now." They both carefully climbed down from the vent, landing silently on the cold floor. Nathan quickly scanned the room, noting the shadows and obstacles between them and the control panel. It wasn't going to be easy. The room was filled with soldiers, each one armed and ready to defend the Queen. If they were caught, it would be the end. The woman gave Nathan a nod, signaling that they should move. Together, they crouched low and darted across the room, using the shadows to their advantage. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the humming of the fortress's technology, but every second felt like an eternity. As they neared the control panel, the woman motioned for Nathan to stay back. She moved forward alone, her movements swift and precise. With a steady hand, she connected a device to the control panel. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as the woman's fingers danced over the screen, typing in commands as quickly as she could. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like a lifetime. Nathan watched nervously, constantly scanning the room for any sign of the Queen's forces. He could hear the faint sounds of footsteps coming closer, and his heart raced with fear. Finally, the woman let out a soft sigh of relief. "I've breached their security," she whispered. "It won't hold for long, but it should be enough." Before Nathan could respond, the room's lights flickered. A loud alarm blared throughout the fortress, its shrill sound echoing off the walls. The woman's eyes widened in panic. "We got company." Nathan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest door. They had no time to waste. The Queen's forces would be all over them in seconds. They ran down the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the cold metal floor. Nathan's heart was hammering in his chest, but he couldn't slow down. They had to escape. Suddenly, a loud crash came from behind them. Nathan spun around to see one of the Queen's elite warriors charging toward them, his massive frame nearly impossible to avoid. The creature's eyes locked onto Nathan and the woman, its expression twisted in fury. The warrior's massive sword glinted in the dim light as he raised it above his head, preparing to strike. Without thinking, Nathan grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her into a side room, just narrowly avoiding the warrior's lethal blow. The door slammed shut behind them, but Nathan knew they wouldn't be safe for long. The warrior would be on them any second. They ran deeper into the room, searching for another escape route. The walls were lined with alien machinery, most of it unfamiliar and dangerous looking. But Nathan's instincts kicked in. He spotted a maintenance hatch in the corner of the room. If they could get to it, they might be able to slip away unnoticed. He pulled the woman toward the hatch, but just as they reached it, the door behind them slammed open. The warrior's growl echoed through the room as he charged toward them. Nathan knew they didn't have much time. With one last burst of energy, he yanked open the hatch and shoved the woman inside. He followed quickly, slamming the hatch shut behind them, just as the warrior reached the door. They were now in the maintenance tunnels, dark, cramped, and narrow. But at least they were safe, for the moment. "We need to move faster," the woman said, her voice tinged with urgency. "The Queen won't stop until we're dead." Nathan nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. If they didn't find a way off this planet, they were doomed. The Queen's wrath was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before she found them. But Nathan wasn't ready to give up. Not now, not when they were so close. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The tunnels beneath the alien fortress seemed endless, dark, and claustrophobic. Nathan and the woman moved quickly, their footsteps echoing softly in the narrow passageways. The dim lights above barely illuminated their path, casting long shadows on the walls. They didn't dare speak much, knowing that any sound could give away their position. The air felt thick with tension, and Nathan's heart raced as they continued deeper into the belly of the enemy's stronghold. The woman, who had proved to be a capable and knowledgeable ally, led the way with determination. Nathan could sense her focus, her mind working over every possible escape route and every trap the Queen might have set for them. But as they rounded a corner, the woman suddenly stopped, her body stiffening in alarm. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I feel a presence. She's close." Nathan didn't have to ask who she meant. The alien Queen's power was unmatched, her intelligence and ruthlessness feared throughout the galaxy. The Queen had already proven that she would stop at nothing to see them dead. And now, it seemed, she had finally caught up to them. Before Nathan could respond, a low hum filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were coming. Fast. "Hide," the woman ordered urgently, pulling Nathan toward a small alcove in the wall. They crouched low, their bodies pressed tightly against the cool stone, hearts pounding in their chests. Nathan's eyes widened as he glanced around, trying to see where the Queen's forces were coming from. Suddenly, the tunnel before them lit up with bright, blinding lights. The sound of heavy boots grew louder. Nathan's stomach twisted into a knot. They were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. His mind raced as he scanned their surroundings for a way out. But it was too late. The Queen's voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the tunnel, sending chills down their spines. "Come out, little rats. I know you're there." Nathan's grip tightened around the woman's arm as they exchanged a brief, silent glance. The Queen's forces had found them, and the time for stealth was over. They had no choice now but to face her wrath. The woman drew a sharp breath, her expression grim. "We fight. We have no other choice." Nathan nodded, his pulse quickening as he drew his weapon. It wasn't much, a simple energy blaster, Nothing compared to the Queen's forces, but it was all they had. They couldn't outrun her army, not anymore. If they were going to survive, they had to outsmart her. With one final glance at the woman, Nathan sprang into action, sprinting toward the open area of the tunnel. His blaster hummed in his hand, and he fired a shot at the oncoming soldiers. The energy pulse struck one of the soldiers, knocking him backward, but Nathan didn't have time to celebrate. He kept running, forcing himself to stay one step ahead. The woman was right behind him, her own weapon ready. They fired together, covering each other's backs as they pushed through the enemy ranks. Alien soldiers fell to the ground, their bodies crumpling in heaps, but there were always more to replace them. The Queen's forces were endless, and Nathan began to wonder if they would ever be able to escape. But they couldn't stop now. Every second mattered. Every movement counted. The Queen was close, and if they didn't get out of there soon, it would be the end. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep, resonating roar echoed through the tunnels, shaking the walls and rattling the ground. Nathan's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. It was the Queen's voice. "Enough," she commanded. "You will die here." The air crackled with energy as the Queen's forces closed in. Nathan's heart skipped a beat as he looked around for any means of escape. There was a small ventilation shaft above them, just wide enough for them to fit through. But it was too far, and there were too many enemies between them and the exit. The woman seemed to read his thoughts. Without a word, she grabbed Nathan's arm and yanked him toward the shaft. Together, they scrambled up the wall, reaching the vent just as the Queen's soldiers stormed into the room. The air was thick with tension, the sounds of battle filling the tunnel as the Queen's soldiers closed in. But just as they were about to climb into the vent, Nathan heard a voice that made his blood run cold. It was the Queen, standing tall and proud at the entrance of the tunnel. Her presence was suffocating, and her eyes burned with hatred. "You think you can escape me?" she hissed, her voice like ice. "You are mine." Nathan's heart raced as he turned to face the woman. There was no more running. They had to fight. With a fierce determination, Nathan pulled out the small device he had stolen earlier from the Queen's control room. The device was a last-ditch effort, a weapon capable of taking down her fortress's defenses. It was their only hope. He activated it, the screen flickering to life with a series of complicated symbols. The woman's eyes widened in realization. "That's it. That's our chance." The Queen, realizing what they were about to do, let out a shrill scream. No. But it was too late. The device activated, sending a powerful surge of energy through the tunnels. The entire fortress shook, and the Queen's soldiers faltered, stunned by the blast. Nathan and the woman took the opportunity to climb into the ventilation shaft, their hearts pounding as the fortress collapsed around them. But they weren't out of danger yet. The Queen's wrath was far from over, and the fight for survival had only just begun. They had no choice but to keep running, keep fighting, and pray that the Queen's army wouldn't catch them before they could escape. But they weren't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The ventilation shaft was narrow and cramped, but it offered them the only chance of escape. Nathan and the woman crawled through the dark tunnel, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of the fortress collapsing behind them echoed through the walls, but they didn't dare stop. Every second mattered. Every moment was a battle to stay ahead of the Queen's fury. But despite their efforts to get away, they knew they were still being hunted. The Queen's forces were relentless, and there was no guarantee that they would make it out alive. Nathan's thoughts raced as he pushed forward, trying to ignore the pain in his body and the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. "We can't keep running forever," the woman said quietly, her voice strained. "Eventually, she'll catch up to us." Nathan nodded grimly, understanding the truth in her words. But what could they do? The Queen's power was unmatched, and they were only two against an entire army. They had no choice but to keep moving in hope that the device they had triggered had done enough to slow the Queen's forces down. After what felt like an eternity, The ventilation shaft finally opened into a wide chamber. It was dimly lit, the walls lined with alien technology. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and burning metal, remnants of the explosion they had caused. Nathan and the woman crept out of the shaft, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. "Stay alert," Nathan whispered, his hand resting on his weapon. She could be anywhere. But there was no sound, no sign of the Queen's forces. For a moment, it seemed as though they had finally found some respite, some safe haven. But Nathan knew better than to let his guard down. This was the Queen they were dealing with. She would not be so easily defeated. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud crash. The doors to the chamber flew open, and the Queen herself strode into the room, her alien form towering above them. Her eyes burned with hatred, and her voice dripped with venom as she spoke. "Did you think you could escape me?" she hissed. "You are nothing. You are weak." Nathan's heart sank as the woman stepped forward, standing beside him. They were cornered, with no escape in sight. But Nathan refused to back down. They had come too far, fought too hard to let the Queen win now. "We're not afraid of you," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his chest. "You've lost." The Queen sneered, her alien features contorting in rage. "You think you've won. You think this is over. You're just delaying the inevitable." But before the Queen could react, Nathan pushed a button on his wrist, activating a secondary feature of the device they had triggered earlier. The energy surge that had already destabilized the fortress began to intensify. The ground beneath them trembled as the walls cracked, and the ceiling groaned under the pressure. "This place is coming down," Nathan said, his voice filled with determination. "We don't have much time." The Queen's eyes widened in realization. "You fool. You think you can destroy me with your pathetic device." Nathan didn't respond. He wasn't trying to destroy her. He was trying to buy them enough time to escape. He grabbed the woman's arm and started to run, pulling her toward the exit of the chamber. The Queen let out a shriek of rage, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. The entire fortress began to shake as explosions rang out, the walls crumbling around them. Nathan and the woman sprinted through the corridors, the Queen's enraged cries echoing behind them. The destruction they had set in motion was unstoppable, and the Queen's fortress was collapsing, piece by piece. They reached an escape pod just in time, the hatch sliding open as they dove inside. Nathan quickly sealed the door, his hands trembling as he activated the pod's launch sequence. The pod shot upward, leaving the crumbling fortress behind. As they ascended into the sky, the final explosion erupted below them, sending a shockwave through the air. The Queen's fortress was gone, reduced to rubble. But the woman didn't look relieved. She looked exhausted, her eyes filled with sorrow. "It's over," Nathan said, trying to reassure her. "We made it." The woman's gaze hardened. "For now, maybe. But the Queen's defeat doesn't mean the war is over. We've just started something much bigger." Nathan nodded, understanding her words. The fight for their survival was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, they had a chance. They had beaten the Queen. They had defied the impossible. And together, they would keep fighting. As the escape pod soared into the unknown, Nathan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The Queen was gone, and humanity's fight for freedom had only just begun.